minutes ago. He had been stuck inside the back end of the 𝗟𝐼𝐿's appliance store, apparently taken out his own radiator, and the engine had seized up, and SWAT team members were trying to get inside the tank. But a tank it is. It's an earth mover no more. It's actually a tank. Do you guys have some questions that you would like to pass along? Those are the propane tanks that he was kind of milling about for a time.
Absolutely. Luann, can you take...
You can see he just is deliberate and determined, and nothing will stop him except his own equipment. What we're going to do, if you can stay with me now, he's going to make one last stand here. We're going to fast forward again and show you how far he gets, and then we'll take it up to where we actually have members of the Grant County SWAT team, the Sheriff's Office SWAT team, standing on top of the Caterpillar, trying to figure out how to get in. I'm sure police officers, sheriff's deputies were themselves assuming for a time that he was armed, because they were trying to keep their distance, trying to take cover. Actually took cover, as you can see there, behind the scraper, but they seemed to realize at some point that he was unable to shoot out, and that at this point...
In 2004, this gentleman, Marvin Heemeyer, disgusted with the government and things that he felt he had been wronged about, and took matter into his own hands in a sleepy Colorado town by creating what is known as the Kildozer. I originally did this video about 2 years ago and have now recut, re-edited, added additional footage, and I'm re-releasing it to you today. The original version will also remain on my channel, but this will be resting in the Keto and Crime Classics playlist for your convenience. And with that being said, let's dive into Marvin's Kildozer.
Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, Keto Comic here. Welcome to Thought Crime, Keto and Crime, and the Keto Comic. Today, everyone, we are looking in to something that happened in 2004 that captured the American imagination, honestly. For those of you watching on video, what you see here before you is the remains of Marvin John Heemeyer's Kildozer. And with this Kildozer, he bulldozed his way into the American folklore forever. Let's get into it, shall we? Marvin Heemeyer was born October 28th, 1951 in Hamlin County, South Dakota. His mother was Augusta Heemeyer, his father, John Heemeyer. He lived in South Dakota the majority of his life until he finally relocated first to Boulder, Colorado in the mid-80s, where he opened and ran a very successful muffler shop. And then around 1991-92, relocated to the towns of Granby and Grand Lake, two small communities very close to each other. As far as we know, he was never married and had no children. Now, not a whole lot is known about Marvin's growing up, but I can tell you this, that both his mother and his father were very traditional in their religion. They raised both their boys, Marvin and his brother Ken, to be that way. They also, growing up in South Dakota, if you know anything about South Dakota, North Dakota, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, that whole High Plains area, it's very much a don't tread on me type of environment. It's very much, they believe in limited government there. Things are pretty sparse in that there's not a whole lot of big cities. There's one or two per state, but everything else is pretty much spread out. So finding people there that practice the prepper or survivalist way of life is not unusual. I'm not saying that Marvin was raised in that atmosphere, but he was raised in a state where that atmosphere was prevalent. So a lot of that, you find a lot of hardcore anarchists and libertarians, and I'm a libertarian myself, though I'm not a radical libertarian. I do believe in limited government. but you find a more radicalized type of libertarian, even anarchist, coming out of that area quite a bit. I think, you know, the Unabombers and things like that. You have the very radical portion of the Mormon church that practices polygamy that live in that area, roughly in the Utah area, which is still in that same area. So you have a lot of living your own way of life that are prevalent in that area. And I'm sure he was exposed to that quite a bit growing up. We don't know a whole lot about his growing up, but we do know that he came from a state where that was prevalent. And all of that will feed into what he's going to do in 2004. As far as we know, he had an average childhood, completed high school, had an interest in working with his hands and auto mechanics and auto body, and that's what he pursued, and it led him to move to Boulder, Colorado in the mid-'80s, where he ran a very successful muffler shop. He sold that to a family and then relocated around 1991-92 to Granby in Grand Lake, Colorado, where he was looking to open yet another muffler shop. And this is where the story starts and gets very interesting. This may be one of the shorter presentations I've ever done, but I still think you'll enjoy it. He ended up purchasing 2 acres of federal land outside the city of Granby, Colorado for $42,000. Now, he purchased this from the Resolution Trust Corporation. Now, this was a corporation set up in the 80s in the height of the savings and loan scandal. Those of you that don't know, in the 80s, you had loan companies or small savings and loans. They weren't quite banks, but they weren't payday lenders either. They were in between. They offered modest loans at modest interest rates, and you could, some for collateral, some for no collateral, but a lot of loans and businesses were conducted with these savings and loans. Well, in the 80s, they started to kind of do some unsavory business practices and did a lot of shady loans and a lot of shady dealings. If you were interested in me doing the savings and loan scandal, let me know down below. Hit me up on a voice message on Thought Crime. I'll be happy to do an episode on that. It goes into the whole check kiting thing with 𝗬𝗏 and all that. So that would be very interesting if you want me to do that. But anyway, this trust was set up. It was one of many trusts set up by the government when this whole savings and loan, when the bottom fell out of it. And they had to do something with the foreclosed properties that the savings and loan had, as well as the properties on which their own building sat. So these trust corporations were set up to dispose of that land, either by selling it or turning it into some conservational project or turning it into a state park, a federal park, what have you. These trusts were set up to deal with that land, and that's from whom he purchased the 2 acres of land he bought for $42,000 around 1991, we think. And for raw land in Colorado, which has always been kind of a land paradise, it's a very good place to live with all the industry that's there. You have the Lockheed Martins and a lot of the big defense contractors calling Colorado home, as well as you have things like NORAD and things like that there. So real estate and land in Colorado has always been on the upswing. So he did get a good deal for that $42,000. Even though it sounds like a lot today, it is a lot today, but it's still a great deal for what he got. Now, he did build his muffler shop, and for a long time had at least a couple of years, had a very booming business, was well liked in the community, met a lady, started dating her. They were planning on getting married. He really was starting to settle into life there near Granby, Colorado. Most people that talked about him said he would give you the shirt off his back. So he wasn't a nasty or even a, somebody that you would think had a screw loose somewhere. He seemed to fit in with the community there really well. The only complaint, there was a lady that came forward and said that her husband had some work done, owed Marvin $124, and they almost came to blows over that money. And she said that Marvin went to extremes to collect that, and they eventually paid that out through a mediator. But he said he got really nasty about it. Now, we don't know what happened there. It could be he did legitimate work and they didn't want to pay, which I can understand somebody getting angry. Or it may have just been you know, a fly-by-night situation where he did come on really strong. So we don't know the situation. I'm just relaying the facts. But outside of that, well-liked in the community. Enter the 𝗏𝗪 family. 𝗏𝗏𝗀, and for those of you on video, the 𝗏𝗪 family is pictured here with members of Colorado State Parks and Recreation branch of government, as well as other high-placed members of their concrete company. They own Mountain Park Concrete, very well known in Colorado. It's still around. Here on the front row, and this is courtesy of the GrandGazette.net, a local newspaper there near Granby, Colorado. This is where, in 2017, where they were honored for their work on a conservation project and helping to restore some land. So, pretty good people, the 𝗏𝗪s. I'm sure, like all business people, they've done some shady dealings, or some dealings that might not seem on the up and up, but that's just true of capitalism, and that's what we're built on here in this country, is capitalism. So, but all respect, a very well-regarded, loved family in Colorado. They run a good business. They've expanded. They're just a well-set-up family in Colorado. All right. So here you have Frank. Then here you have Cody, who's the subject of our story, and you have Cody's wife, Susie. They come along around 1994, 95, and they offer to purchase the land on which Marvin's muffler shop sits for $250,000, which is more than triple what he paid for it. In fact, agrees to it, and then when he realizes that they want this land for a new concrete finishing plant, he kind of jacks up the price. He then asks for $375,000. They agree to that. He then jacks it up to a deal worth close to $1 million. And they don't quite go for that. There's a huge squabble between the two. There's a lot of pushback and push forward and a lot of negotiating. And finally, they do settle on buying a portion of his land for an agreed upon price. And the land that they purchased of his, of course, was adjacent to his existing muffler shop. I believe he kept like the small quarter to a half acre that his muffler shop actually sat on, and sold them the rest for a more exuberant type of price instead of selling them all the land. So that's kind of the deal, kind of got rectified as things went along. Well, there was some zoning issues to build their concrete plant. They petitioned the local commission to rezone the area for industrial so that they could build that. I mean, you could have a normal business there, but a plant which is going to have an environmental impact and things like that, it's not really something that's usually agreed upon in the normal scheme of things. So there was a lot of years of negotiation with the city as they tried to get a permit to build this concrete plant. And Marvin suddenly decided he didn't want the concrete plant near his muffler shop, even though he had sold them the land for that explicit purpose. And he started to appeal and fight against the zoning. He went into town. He got a bunch of petition. He got a bunch of signatures. He tried to negotiate with the 𝗏𝗪 families. He tried to negotiate with the city, saying that it would basically put his business under because they would block in a lot of transportation and things like that. And he really gave him a hard time. Now, a lot of people regard Marvin as a true American hero, somebody that flipped in the face of an oppressive local government and did what he had to do. A good man pushed to the brink is the story I often hear. I'm going to take another stance on this and say that he got greedy. He had a good deal on the land. He got greedy. They agreed to an even higher price. Then he kind of shot himself in the foot with the deal by, again, changing the terms. And then, to get revenge, this dude decides he's going to keep him from using the land for the purpose it was sold for. And I think this was the case of somebody that flipped because his own greed and his own muddled way of thinking got in his way. Now, you can come at me with all the hate you want. That's not, because what he did was not good. I mean, it's a cool story, but it's not good. And if you make a deal, stick with it. And what he did to this family was kind of dirty. I'm sure everybody does dirty dealings, but what he did was dirty. And it bit him in the ass. So he fought against the zoning, but eventually the city did zone the property and gave the 𝗏𝗏𝗃s the permission to build a plant there for Mountain Park Concrete. But you may be thinking, well, why? Why would they agree to this plant being put in an area that was not normally zoned for industrial? Well, the plant was probably going to provide a couple of thousand jobs for the city. I live in a city where they give huge tax breaks to bring companies here and provide jobs, and our city has grown tremendously as a result. So I'm all about kind of a give and take system between government and business, and I think that's what happened here. They realized it would be a benefit, the tax benefits, the jobs, more people moving into the area that provides, more opportunity. I think they just saw the benefits outweighing this one or two man ran muffler shop being there. So, kind of the thoughts of the majority appealed. And remember, Marvin had the opportunity to sell all of his land to them and get out of there and go move his muffler shop somewhere else, but he didn't. So whose fault was that really? Now, in 2001, as I said, they approved the concrete batch plant. Marvin did appeal it with more petitions and things like that. He was turned down everywhere. They said, no, this plant's happening. Okay, construction on the plant begins. And due to the construction, a couple of things happen. They do block the main road access for Marvin's plant, for Marvin's muffler shop with the construction of the plant. He goes and complains about that, says, hey, can't they do something else? They're blocking, people can't get up to my muffler shop. The city says, we can't do anything about that. You need to go talk to them. He went and talked to 𝗏𝗏𝗃. 𝗏𝗏𝗃 said, there's nothing we can do. We have to get our equipment into the plant. Now, I'm sure by this time, 𝗏𝗏𝗃's probably had enough of Marvin, and he's probably doing some pushback of his own, being very unreasonable. I'm not saying that the 𝗏𝗏𝗃 family were angels in this. I'm just saying I think probably 𝗏𝗏𝗃 had had enough of Marvin by this time and was giving him as much as Marvin was giving them. So, also, during the course of the construction, because the sewer lines and water lines for the muffler shop ran through the land that Marvin had sold them, where they were building their plant, that water and sewage line had to be shut off during the construction. So now you've shut off all water access to Marvin's muffler shop. So Marvin starts dumping his own human waste in buckets into an open irrigation ditch, and the city comes in and fines him $2,500 for that. He then says, well, can't I just go switch on my sewer line? And the city says, you'll have to get permission from the new landowners, the 𝗏𝗏𝗃s, to do that. And I'm sure, again, 𝗏𝗏𝗃 was messing with him and said, no, you can't do that. It'll get in the way of our construction. So now he's stuck paying this huge fine with no way to take a dump on his own facility. So that started to swell up in him. So he again goes to the city and asks for permission to build a road. He put in a petition to build his own access from the main highway into his muffler plant. And he went ahead and said, I'm just going to start construction. So he went and bought a bunch of concrete, steel. He even bought a bulldozer, which will prove very important later, to build this road himself. Instead of getting a contractor to do it, he was going to do it himself. And he just assumed that the city was going to grant his petition. Well, they didn't. They denied it. And he had spent thousands of dollars on all this equipment to no avail. And he can't really sell his muffler shop now because it doesn't have sewage, doesn't have water. It's now got this plant being built next to it. Even the 𝗏𝗏𝗃s no longer want to buy that last little bit of land that he owned to kind of expand their plant. They're kind of done with him. So he's really sitting there like a pigeon on a stool. I mean, he's lost money on this deal. He now can't really operate a business because there's really no good road access. So at this point, a switch does flip in his brain. And for a year and a half, he starts working on a very important project of his in his muffler shop, in a shed out back of his muffler shop. He takes the Komatsu D355A bulldozer that he bought for building his own road, which is now kind of the world's largest paperweight, as he can't really use it to build the road since the city denied his permit. He moves that bulldozer into a shed out back of his muffler plant, his muffler shop, and starts outfitting it like a tank. He buys a ton of quick mix concrete from a company in Denver. He starts outfitting the entire cab and back chassis of this bulldozer, for those of you on video can see it here, with 1 foot thick steel and 1 foot thick slabs of that quick mix concrete. So he would put steel, then he would put concrete, then more steel. So in some places on this bulldozer, it was outfitted with about 2 feet worth of impervious material. This made it absolutely impervious to bullets, to the strikes of small vehicles. I mean, it was a fortress. He also, because he had covered up all the glass and couldn't really see, he outfitted it with several video cameras protected by bulletproof plastic and glass, equipped with air blowers so that from the inside he could actually blow off debris so that he could continue to see. And he mounted 2 analog type monitors. These were the old-fashioned television monitors with the backs inside the cab so that he could see what he was doing. But because he couldn't put a door in this thing because of the concrete and the steel, the only way this thing could be gotten onto the bulldozer was by use of a crane. So once you were in the cab, you were in the cab, you weren't coming out. He also outfitted it with 3 gun ports for a .50 caliber rifle, a .308 semi-automatic rifle, and a .22 LR rifle, as well as a pistol that he kept in the cab with himself. So, according to townspeople, a lot of people that were continuing to use his muffler shop, even though it was in kind of distress, would kind of see these weird goings on, but they didn't really report it. I mean, you got to remember, this is out west. This is the Wild West. People don't get scared about weapons the way that a lot of people do. So they didn't really think much of it. They just thought maybe he was eccentric, and because he was already considered, because of all the goings on, kind of a weird person in town. So I didn't really think much of it. And for over a year, he worked on his project until June 4th, 2004, when he decided it was time. He got into the cab of the Kildozer. He lowered the chassis over it, the concrete and steel chassis over it with the crane, and he locked himself inside with just a pistol and a couple of fans to keep himself cool. And he was off to get revenge on both the people and a town that he thought had wronged him. The first thing he did was drive right through the wall of his muffler shop. And for those of you on video, you can see it right here in the middle, that huge gaping hole where he just drove right through the wall of his own muffler shop. The next target was, of course, the 𝗏𝗪 concrete plant, which is right next door. And for those of you on video, here to your right, that's what happened to the concrete plant. He drove right through it and caused the front wall and the ceiling to collapse. Now, when he attacked the concrete plant, 𝗏𝗂𝗀 decided he was going to take matters to his own hands, and he got into a wheel tractor scraper. It's kind of I'll insert a clip here.
It was an earth scraper they moved in to try to do some combat, to try to in some way immobilize the scraper. Almost got to where he was turning it over at that point there, but the scraper is just no match for the cat there, the caterpillar turned tank.
He got into it to try to basically fight off the Kildozer, but that tractor scraper was no match for the armored bulldozer, and Cody was soundly defeated. Now, it was at this point that Marvin started to fire. He started to fire on Cody in that tractor with the guns through the ports. He also went to a close-by propane area, and a lot of people thought he was going to drive over the propane tanks and blow it up, but he wasn't. He did take select shots at propane tanks. He also took a few shots at sheriffs and town police that were already descending on him, but he wasn't really firing on civilians. And so after he left the concrete plant and the nearby propane storage area, he made his way into town, and he had 13 very specific targets in mind. He attacked City Hall, driving right through it. He attacked the local library, where there were people inside. They said he didn't want to kill anybody. Well, he was attacking people during the afternoon when business was still going on, and there was actually a children's educational program going on in the library when he drove through it. He could have killed a bunch of kids. Also, what about the people in City Hall when he drove through it? He also drove through the house of the former mayor who had passed away that his 70-year-old widow was living in, and she was home. It was just lucky that he didn't kill her. He drove through, all in all, about 13 different buildings, causing $7 million in damage, though no innocent people were killed. His final target was Gamble's Hardware and Appliance Store. This was a family, another rich entrepreneurial business family in town that had had worked against him during the whole planning process. He also took out the local newspaper because they had written a bad editorial about him. But when he got to Gamble's, when he drove in, he damaged the radiator of the Kildozer. So it was starting to have engine problems, and he fell through the floor. One of the tracks of the bulldozer fell through the floor of the appliance and hardware store and ended up in the basement. So at that point, he was kind of not able to move at all. Police, including the SWAT team, began to descend on him. While he was in there, they even pulled the same scraper tractor that 𝗂𝗍𝗄𝗃 had used at the plant to try to take him out. They even pulled that in front of the entrance of the hardware store to keep him there so they couldn't get out. So all this activity was taken when he was already stalled with one rung of his Kildozer caught in the basement of this store. And it was about 60 to 90 seconds after he stalled out and stopped his engine that they heard a single gunshot ring out from the cab of the Kildozer. It took them hours to break in. They tried explosives. They tried dynamite. Finally, they got a crane in and basically lifted it off. Got welders in there and basically lifted it off. And they found Marvin dead in the cab. Single gunshot wound to the head. And it was only after this, about 3 or 4 months later, that his brother Ken mailed them tapes that Marvin had mailed to him outlining his manifesto. And I'm going to play you a clip of that tape that was taken. But these tapes were recorded between April and May of 2004. And this took place in June. So the final one was recorded around about a month before he actually did it. I'm going to play you a clip from that, overlaid with some scenes that happened from that day, right after this.
In that neighborhood, in that community, but it's against your wishes and your will. Maybe what happens here this year of 2004, the summer of 2004, maybe you'll remember that. So there were, back in the early 1900s or late 1800s, there were 4 people died up here in Grand Lake over the where the county court should be, whether it should be here in Grand Lake or Hot Sulphur Springs. I don't know how many years people remembered that incident, but they still talk about it today. What the purpose of all that, those people dying were, I really don't know. But it seems like this has to happen again and again and again in human nature, that we kill each other so that the next generation looks at things differently, where they will open their mind and be open to other people's ideas. It's a cycle in that neighborhood, in that community, but it's against your wishes and your will. Maybe what happens here this year of 2004, the summer of 2004, maybe you'll remember that. So there were, back in the early 1900s or late 1800s, there were 4 people died up here in Grand Lake over the, where the county court has, how it should be, whether it should be here in Grand Lake or Hot Sulphur Springs. I don't know how many years people remembered that in.
And that's where we end. Tell me what you think. What's your opinion? Was he an American hero fighting against a corrupt government, or was he somebody that just kind of shot himself in the foot and then couldn't hack it? I'll leave that up to you. I've already stated my opinion. But that's the story of Marvin's Kildozer. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back soon. Like, comment, share, subscribe. 𝗙𝗂𝗀𝗏. Out.